Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for coming down on this lovely afternoon. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal and the Wongal people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and to acknowledge their young people who will be our future leaders. Thanks again for coming. My name's Nicole Dennis. I'm the Director of Cobalt Engagement. I'm the independent facilitator today on today's session. We've got a lot of council people in the room today who are here to listen to your feedback on this planning proposal. We've got Simone Plummer, the Director of Planning, and we've also got Daniel East, the Manager of Planning, and a number of the other team members here. We're all adults, so I probably don't need to go into all these rules, but here we're all here to listen respectfully to each other and to listen to all of the different views that may come up today. So please don't speak over anyone else, and we will have time to get to you all. Please don't record this session with your own device. We have been recording some of the earlier sessions for information for council, but we will not be recording any of the Q&A. Details, if there's any Q&A questions we can't answer today, they'll be emailed up to all of the attendees today. And we're going to end on time by 5, if not before, depending on how many questions we get. Bit of housekeeping. We've got emergency exit over there to my left, your right, and bathrooms straight down there. So the purpose today is an information session on the planning proposal that Council is exhibiting for the Taverners Hill precinct as part of the Parramatta Road PR cuts. The session today will inform you on what is being proposed. We'll have Simone and Daniel present in detail on what planning controls are proposed to be changed and what that means for the future of development and for the community in this precinct. The purpose is to inform you so that you can make your own submission due on the 17th of December, and that submission can be based on a good understanding on what Council is doing through this proposal. And it's also an opportunity for you to ask questions and have those questions answered now, or for those to be followed up with the appropriate technical response. So I'll hand over to Daniel now. He's going to be going through a lot of the detail. Then it will be Simone. And if you could just hold your questions until after that, I'll be facilitating a Q&A.
I'm just a little bit taller than Nicole. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. As Nicole said, I will be taking you through some of the background to this planning proposal, and then Simone will take you through some of the technical controls after that. So we will be covering off on what a planning proposal actually will be doing or proposed to do in this local area, and what it will not be doing, and we'll be having a particular focus on the Taverners Hill area, which is the subject of the meeting today. Some of you may have been involved in this proposal for a very long time, others maybe not so much. So to bring everyone up to speed, this has been an extremely long period of time. As you can see on the diagram there, in late 2013, the state government did some community consultation, which some of you might have been involved with, to see people's views, to understand what they termed was the Parramatta Road Urban Transformation Strategy, which we are referring to as PR cuts for this proposal, and that was to extend the area from Camperdown to Granville along the Parramatta Road corridor. So there was that consultation then in 2013. Eventually it was supported by the state government and given what's termed a ministerial direction. And then it's a matter for us as council that we must consider the planning controls that were exhibited then in any planning proposal that we do now. So that's the subject of this planning proposal that we are focusing on at the moment. Yeah, I can, and I was going to get to that, but I can certainly do it now, just so that people know. Many people are familiar with the DA process, and that's an application to the council. against the planning controls that apply at that point in time. A planning proposal is a proposal to amend the planning controls, and then after that point, a DA is lodged to council that is in accordance with those planning controls. Hopefully, council will assess it and approve or refuse, depending on it. That's right. That's right. So, these are the areas that are the subject to the state government's PR cuts. There are 4 in the inner west: Camperdown, Leichhardt, Taverners Hill and Kings Bay. Camperdown's greyed out because that is subject to a separate piece of work around RPA Hospital and Sydney Uni. But the rest of the areas is what we are focusing on at the moment: Leichhardt, Taverners Hill and Kings Bay. Now, we are not doing the entire corridor. I'll go through a few more maps associated with that. That's why we're calling it stage 1. But they're the 4 precincts that apply to Inner West. I will say Kings Bay, you can see there on the map, is actually in 3 different LGAs. Burwood and Canada Bay also has areas there as well. So those precincts were picked by the state government as precincts that can support extra development once Parramatta Road transforms over time with infrastructure improvements. That was the vision of the state government. And as I was saying, there is a whole bunch of state and local strategies that support this planning proposal. On the left-hand side, you can see the actual PR cuts document, which is a New South Wales government document. And there are all sorts of implementation actions and guidelines that we are required to follow. And that's been set in stone by the strategic planning documents for Sydney, the Eastern City District Plan. In the centre is the council documents, and they focus on creating better places for people and a local housing strategy, which are there as council's position. And then we've got the planning proposal studies, and that's the subject to this actual community consultation at the moment. There's been a whole bunch of technical studies that council has undertaken and required to undertake around flooding, traffic and transport, contamination, economic assessments, aircraft noise, and heritage and affordable housing and so on. So those are the documents that you can see at the back of the room and also on the website associated with the planning proposal. So that's what we're focusing on at the moment. You can see we've drilled down now into these 3 areas. The dotted line is the PR cuts identification area by the state government. We are not doing the entire area initially, as I said. That's why we're calling it stage 1. We are focusing, for example, in the Leichhardt precinct, we're proposing 700 dwellings and about 1,300 jobs. Now that is centred on the eastern half of Norton Street, down to Parramatta Road and a little bit on that Dodds led to Crystal Street that you can see there on the shaded part of the map. In Taverners Hill, which I'm sure you're focusing on, we're proposing about 400 dwellings in 2 separate areas. One area around Tebbit Street, Beeston Street and Hatton Street in that red hashed area, and then another area just near Lewisham Station. And then on the left-hand side, there's Kings Bay, 400 dwellings, 500 jobs on the very edge of our LGA along Parramatta Road and Delmar Street. Now, we have selected these areas because these areas already have good public transport links, and that's part of the PR Cuts vision. It also has and will support future economic growth, particularly for Norton Street. And also we are proposing new heritage items. They are the orange areas that you can see identified near the pink areas. There's about 5 for Taverners Hill, for example. So they are also part of the planning proposal, yes.
Thanks, that's a great question. We're going to have a lot of questions. Is it okay if we hold that question to the end of the presentation? Because we're going to have a lot of questions. So I'll come back to you. But yeah, we'll just keep going if that's all right, but definitely come back to that.
But I
Thanks,
will
Danny.
come back to that at the end. So the inner west housing targets, I just wanted to put this slide in to set some context because we are not in isolation here in the inner west. You can see the table on the left-hand side has our dwelling targets for each of the surrounding council areas around the inner west. So there are existing dwellings. So for the inner west, we've got about 75,000 existing dwellings. That was back in 2016. In 20 years, an extra 20 dwellings also, 20,900, with a percentage increase of 28%. But you can see us compared to the other LGAs in our surrounding area, and they are quite significant, you know, the 40, 50% increases. Now, in the West has already got lower dwelling targets, and that's because the department does acknowledge that we are a difficult place to develop. We have aircraft noise, we have site contamination, we have flooding constraints beyond what many of these other LGAs have. So that's why ours is lower, but we still need to be meeting these dwelling targets. The table on the right-hand side gives a 5-year target. So the base year is 2016, goes out to 2036, and you can see those different targets. It's about 1,000 dwellings a year. And at the moment, we have the planning controls to allow it. But very soon, we are running out of developable land in our LGA. And so we need to be providing some more development. We have identified, as has the state government, this precinct as an area that could undergo change. The planning proposal is trying to achieve a high quality of life and connect communities through the Parramatta Road corridor easily through connections to open space and town centres. We are, as I said, proposing to extend some heritage items and heritage conservation areas as part of this planning proposal. And also, as I touched on, we are needing to meet our dwelling targets that are set by the state government. We are looking to increase affordable housing, and I'll touch on that later in the presentation, and also more ecologically sustainable development, which I'll also touch on. So we are trying to facilitate additional jobs and dwellings in these precincts through an incentive mechanism through the planning proposal, and I'll explain on what that means on the next slide. So typically, thank you, Lucy, for getting me to explain planning proposals. Typically what happens is council or the private sector can propose to change the planning controls. That goes through this exhibition process that we're undertaking at the moment, and then the planning controls will change, generally to allow a land use change or a density change, and then a DA is lodged. What we are proposing to do as part of this planning proposal is to allow the development, but only with some incentive criteria, so that developers won't have direct access to those planning controls initially. They would need to be able to prove to council that they can provide a high quality built form. So many of these areas will be larger than 3 or 4 stories. That goes to our design review panel, for example, to make sure a high quality urban design. They'll have active street frontages, which is particularly relevant to the Leichhardt precinct. So that means, you know, having shop fronts and that sort of stuff. Higher quality in terms of energy and water usage of those new buildings, given that we are in a climate emergency. And then also additional tree canopy coverage and deep soil planting. So that is beyond what the standard is for the entire state, because there are certain rules around that. We've gone beyond that, but the only way to do that is to offer this incentive FSR and height. We are also looking at a 2% affordable housing provision in the Leichhardt precinct, and that's because it's affordable in that location. So generally, they will be dedicated to council. Council will manage it to an affordable housing provider. In the occasion that it's too small, it's a monetary contribution. And I have more slides on that very soon. So this is for that's relevant to the Leichhardt precinct, not for Taverners Hill. So yeah, on Norton Street, we want that siding shop front. No, so as I showed on the previous slides, there's no jobs proposed in the Taverners Hill area, so therefore there's no need to have that requirement for Taverners Hill. I just want to cover off what a planning proposal does not do. We are not Westconnett's. We don't, as a council, acquire your land and develop it for housing. That's not what we do. All we can do as officers is encourage redevelopment of these areas to make it more attractive, that they turn over, and developers can put 1 or 2 lots together, or 3 lots, make a larger development to allow more people to live in Sydney where they would like to live. And that's quite important as the house prices do increase a lot. It does increase the supply of housing and allow people to live where they work. One of the other concerns that has been coming up is around the property rates. As a landowner, I will be concerned about property rates. Now, there are mechanisms under the Local Government Act that can pause the increases every 5 years. You will need to apply for that initially up front when the planning controls change, and then when you sell the property at some point in the future, that could be 1 year, it could be 20, 50 years, that it's at that point that the property price increase will pay for the difference in rates. So no initial change in the rates is the point to make there. And then of course, we have assessed overshadowing privacy at the planning proposal stage, but that is quite high level. And then at the DA stage, there is another opportunity, 1, for council to make an assessment of the application, and 2, for the community to be heard and be part of that community consultation. There are additional sustainability provisions associated with the planning proposal, and again, this is onto and above the standardised rates for New South Wales. So there are additional energy and water targets that those new buildings will be required to meet, and that's to deal with climate change. There are what we call on-site end-of-trip facilities. So that means when you ride your bike, you'll have a place to have a shower, store your bike, and so it encourages you to ride your bike more. There are additional controls to encourage green walls and green roofs, because we know that is important to create better places for both people and also the environment. There are controls around fully electric utilities, cooking, heating, hot water. Again, that's above the state controls. And also photovoltaic cells on the roof, along with planting around it as well to help with that energy use. Most people we envisage in the future will be driving electric cars. These buildings will be around for 100 years. So facilities for EV charging, and also potentially some reduced car parking as well, to encourage car share and go-get and those sort of arrangements. I want to touch on tree canopy, and so that's trees in the area, because I know that is a concern of the community. There are tree canopy targets. Initially, they were to apply to the entire precinct. The Department of Planning, in its gateway determination, said, don't focus on your own council land, you have to focus only on private land. So that's what we've done in terms of setting these tree canopy targets, and they said the same thing to Canada Bay Council. So we have these targets. It does depend on the size of the land, but those targets are set. You'll see there are dashes for the deep soil, and for Taverners Hill, that's because that is for a residential flat building or apartment building, and there are state controls that we can't supersede around that. Yes? So it's a very good question. You can see the diagram on the right-hand side. Now, the top diagram is the existing situation. They're very small lots, mostly in Taverners Hill, a couple of 100 square metres, with either detached, small, semi-detached houses mostly. And then at the back is the backyard, and that's generally where the significant trees are. So what we are trying to do as a council is force potentially 2 or 3 lots together and have a larger building, but retain that rear setback to allow the additional deep soil, so the trees to grow and be retained. There are controls in our development control plan around retaining significant trees and also planting new ones to meet these tree canopy targets. Parking provisions.
Some good questions, but Daniel, do you want to keep going, or would you like to do the questions on?
I can do the questions as I go, although we might hear the questions at the end. There is time for questions at the end as well.
Yeah, so hold on to your questions, everyone, just so we can keep going with the presentation.
Because there may be some slides that might answer some of your questions as well. Oh yeah, absolutely. So with the parking provisions, we are trying to minimise parking generation. So there are reduced rates for these areas at maximum LEP car parking rates. There are what we call unbundled and decoupled car parking. Now they are technical terms, but decoupled, and I always get these two mixed up. Decoupled is where you can have a car park that's next to the site that also services the site to create a more efficient parking layout, because the last thing you want is a million driveways everywhere. And then decoupled is where, unbundled is where it's, engineering terms, is where you don't necessarily buy a car park associated with a unit, particularly when units are quite unaffordable for many people. Maybe they don't need a car, so they won't need to buy it, because that we know is about up to $100,000 per unit. But they can also, so there will be a certain amount of parking to go around for each of the units. That's right. All right, I'm going to continue the presentation and then we can have that discussion at the end. All right, affordable housing. Now, this does apply to the Leichhardt precinct, not Taverners Hill. Inner West tries to create as much affordable housing as possible. And we have looked at each of these areas, Kings Bay, Taverners Hill and Leichhardt. Because of the small scale of development in Kings Bay and Taverners Hill, the only area that we could focus on for affordable housing was the Leichhardt precinct in Norton Street. That's through what's called an affordable housing contribution scheme. So that will mean at the DA stage, there will be a condition of consent. No negotiation that, depending on the scale of development, 2% of the strata area will be given to council to manage through an affordable housing provider. And that's to allow other people less well off, that still need to live in the inner west, to actually afford to live in the inner west. Now, as I said, the scale of development in Taverners Hill, which is the subject of this area, was unviable to allow that scheme to occur. Yeah, it is. So we've spoken to other councils, so Canada Bay, Randwick, Parramatta, it's the common rate, and we're using the state government's viability tool. Not in Taverners Hill. No. So there'll be development contributions, but not for affordable housing. So we do have an affordable housing scheme, a policy. if you could write that down, I can see you've got
Yeah,
a pen, and
we'll
then
come back.
I'll answer it all at the end, all the different questions at the end.
Thanks everyone
But
for
I
these
do
great
like
questions.
the enthusiasm, it's great. This is one of my last slides, and I'm going to hand over to Simon. The flood risk management, we've done some research in this area for Taverners Hill because there are some existing flood impacts. From our perspective, the analysis shows that there is no additional impacts as a result of this new development, and so therefore we meet the ministerial directions related to flooding. We have managed the building setbacks to accommodate this, and as I showed, basically the building footprint is similar to what's there, with those greater setbacks to allow those tree planting to occur. And so when we submitted that to the Department of Planning for the gateway determination, they were satisfied with that analysis as well. I should also add, we have noticed today that there is a slight error in our flood maps. There are a few flood maps that are missing, and we have contacted the consultant today. They should give us those missing flood maps as soon as possible over the next 24 to 48 hours, we believe. And then as soon as that's available, we'll put that on the website. Now I'm going to hand over to Simon, who will go through more detail for Taverners Hill.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Hi everyone, it's great to see you. I notice a few familiar faces. Thank you very much all for coming out. It's much more fun for us to have this discussion with a full room when we can really share information. We sometimes have sessions where we get less turnout, and it's really helpful for us to hear your thinking and to understand the concerns and issues that you raise. So it's wonderful to have so many of you here today. So the planning proposal, as Daniel mentioned, is proposing new residential developments close to existing public transport infrastructure around Lewisham Railway Station and Taverners Hill Light Rail Station. It doesn't include employment lands at this time because at the time when the planning proposal was being developed, the department was also reviewing its strategy around employment lands, so that is being dealt with separately. There are two areas within the precinct, as Daniel mentioned. There's the area around Beeson, Kegworth and Tebbert Streets, north of Parramatta Road, and then the other area south of Parramatta Road along Old Canterbury Road. And the precinct is proposed to be rezoned to be R3 medium density residential to permit residential flat buildings. There are around 108 existing dwelling lots in the Taverners Hill precinct. So the rezoning or the planning proposal has the potential through redevelopment to provide roughly 4 times that number in future. Currently, the precinct is characterised by single and some 2-storey residential dwellings, and with future redevelopment under this planning proposal, the precinct is proposed to look very different, with the dominant housing form being residential flat buildings. You can see a few lots down in the southern area that are yellow, so those are the proposed heritage changes, which include 4 new heritage items, including the Lewisham Hotel and a new heritage conservation area that encompasses 8 properties along Barker Street. Within the Taverners Hill precinct, walking links are being prioritised, and at the same time as this planning proposal was being developed, Council was also developing its new infrastructure contributions plan, which is the plan that requires payment by developers for the provision of Council's infrastructure. And in this plan, the precinct has been nominated as the Green Lung, particularly around Tebbert Street, which means that Council has plans for the public domain. That's the land that Council manages around footpaths, streets and the verge, as well as parks. So the green lung, meaning that we will be enhancing the tree canopy, providing for the footpath and active transport, and also managing urban heat island through this tree canopy. So this slide shows you some of the key changes around the Taverners Hill precinct, particularly Tebbit and the Beeson Street properties, which are shown in pink. They're proposed to be zoned for three and 4 story residential flat buildings. Tebbit Street East, which is shown in orange, is that? Yes, it's good, it's quite clear. Are also proposed to be rezoned to residential flat buildings up to 6 stories in height. The relatively deep lots in Beeson and Kegworth Street and relatively low building footprint associated with 3 to 4 story building typology, not me, compared to the 1 and 2 story terrace and townhouse development that our study had initially explored, allows more open space for tree cover while also increasing the dwelling yield. So what we're looking for is tighter buildings with smaller building footprints that are taller. The wide streets around Beeson and Kegworth with green front setbacks can accommodate this increase in height and density. And this typology ensures a regular street pattern and maintains the existing street character through landscaped front setbacks. It reduces driveway crossovers and retains existing vegetation at the rear. With regard to development on Tebbit Street, the urban design study demonstrated that 6 story residential flat buildings on Tebbit Street can provide a good transition from the existing high-rise Leichhardt Green development, some people know it as the old Colotex site, around Upwood and George Street, which is 8 stories. Overlooking issues can be mitigated through 6-metre rear setbacks, and planting this zone with trees and providing for fence and screening on the Upwood Street boundary can assist with direct overlooking issues from the neighbouring development. So this is the Lewisham side, which shows the properties in yellow, proposed between 3 and 5 stories, and around Thomas Street, shown in purple, are proposed to be residential flat buildings of 4 stories. So these are the proposed LEP maps that some of you might be familiar with if you've been looking through the documentation that we have online. The land use zoning map shows the rezoning to R3 to include opportunity for residential flat buildings. And these maps work together with the incentive clauses that Daniel mentioned to set the form of the new development within the precinct. We have medium density around floor space and height of building maps, which also work together to set the form. There are some differences in the planning proposal compared to PR cuts as originally endorsed by the Department of Planning, and these are largely because Council has invested in a fine-grained approach to planning, recognising the clearer understanding of the importance of environmental values to our community. And some of those differences are around refined density controls that better respond to the existing context and that allow for additional greening opportunities than were originally envisaged by the Department of Planning. This is a massing model, which is helpful in providing a sense of scale of the proposed forms of development that will be possible under the incentive controls that we've discussed. What they show is a variation in height along the street frontages, the 3 to 4 stories that I mentioned in Tebbit and Beeson, the 6 stories along Tebbit Street East, the 3 to 5 stories along Old Canterbury Road, and 4 stories along Thomas Street in the south. They show the relationship without any architectural features. They're almost like shoebox designs. They just show you exactly what that building envelope will look like. And they give you some understanding of the relationship of that building form toward the buildings next to it or behind or adjacent. They show how deep soil planting and tree canopy protection will work. because tree canopy targets are so important for us. The DCP controls require the new development to protect and provide for curbside landscaped areas that retains existing street trees to the public verge and within the private site area. So the massing models give you a sense of the building envelope and that relationship with neighbouring buildings, but they lack design or architectural relief. So they don't represent what the built form is going to look like when it finally arrives. And here is a bit of an artist's impression that might show you what that might look like. It's indicative only, but it shows, this in particular shows Tebbit Street looking east toward Upwood Street, where the 6-storey residential flat buildings will be permissible. And this area is within 200 metres of walking distance to the Taverners Hill light rail station. And here's another illustration of what the developments might look like, showing Old Canterbury Road and Barker Street intersections where 3 to 5-storey residential flat buildings will be permissible. And this site's within 300 metres of walking distance to Lewisham train station. So we've got just generally some proposed development control amendments. Now, Daniel talked to you about what the planning proposal looks like, and that sets the strategic framework for understanding what the height of buildings, what the floor space ratio might need to be. And then when the detail comes to it, it's through the development control plans. And they set out things like the built form, landscaping requirements, vehicle and service access. So those development controls provide the fine-grained detail that which is a lot more about how we relate to it once we're over the height and the floor space. Now, in particular, I just wanted to touch on lot amalgamation, because I know that that's been a question for many people about how do we go from what the neighbourhood looks like now with single dwelling lots in the ownership of one family or one person. How do we transition from that into a community of residential flat buildings? And one of the ways, or in fact the most critical way that we do that, is through lot amalgamation, which is when developers purchase land at a price agreed on by owners and consolidate those lots and come to council with a development application on the consolidated lot, which is then assessed against the planning controls that Daniel was talking about and the development controls that I just talked to briefly. And that's the trigger or the process that we go through for transformation of a neighbourhood, such as we're talking about at Taverners Hill. So this is a bit of a time frame of where we've come from and where we're going. So we're in the community consultation process now, where we are asking you to share with us your concerns, where we're asking you to clarify for us any of the issues that you have, to assist you to write a submission that will address the planning proposal as is, to allay concerns that you might have that are not in fact true, so that we can give you some clarity about what you're concerned about, but what this planning proposal does not do, which is the slide that Daniel showed you. So we're going through that reviewing, next comes a reviewing feedback, and then we provide an engagement outcomes report to council. Council is not the plan-making authority for this planning proposal. It is the Department of Planning and the Minister. We provide the planning proposal to council for their review, and then we forward it to the Department of Planning for their consideration. We are obliged to provide that to them by March next year. The Department of Planning have said that they will finalise their consideration of this planning proposal by June or mid next year. Once they have done that, Whatever that looks like, the planning proposal will then be gazetted, which means it has force. It is something under which development applications must be assessed. It's at that time when the development stakeholders, developers, become interested in the land and may come looking for the opportunity to purchase lots for lot consolidation and to lodge development applications. When they lodge development applications, that is when council becomes involved again through the development assessment process. When a development application is approved, that's when the construction starts. So that's, in a bit of a nutshell, what that process looks like and how that transformation takes place. Yes, that's correct. In the event that council makes a decision to refuse an application which a developer considers is challengeable, the Land and Environment Court has the opportunity to review that and make its own determination. Now, sometimes council would refuse an application because we aren't convinced by the information that has been brought before us. So that then is what the developer would use as a little bit of a check to go away and get a bit more documentation to do the convincing, and then they'll try it on in the Land and Environment Court. But that is indeed where we're at.
Thanks so much, Simone. I'd also like to acknowledge Councillor Shetty and Councillor De Cruz, who are with us this afternoon as well. So if you would like more information, all the documents are here today and they're also online. I just want to point you to that information. There's a drop-in session this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 12 noon, and there's at Leichhardt Town Hall for this precinct, but all the information for all the precincts will be available. There's also another drop-in session the following Saturday. So if you've got neighbours or other interested parties, we'll all be here having a casual chat, answering your questions. There's also another session for this precinct. There's more coming online because I think Thursday evening is booked out, so there's some more sessions on Wednesday, the 6th of January, that have been advertised since these ones have booked out as well. So we're going to get to questions in just a second. Oh, December, sorry. So submissions are due 17th of December in writing. That's how your information, your feedback will be considered. Council are listening today, but the best way that you can have your voice heard is to get it in a written submission. If you need assistance or access or translation, please come and chat to us today, or there's some more access requirements on the website or through the council phone number. So Simone mentioned the engagement report will also be written that summarises and analyses all those submissions and outlines how they may affect any changes that might happen as the basis and as the outcomes of this engagement.